Some trouble involving some Sacketts? I believe you are right, Paul. I do recall something of the kind. An attempt was made to rob one of them, and there was a fight. Quite a bloody one.
That could be the answer, Uncle Andre,
Fanny suggested. A Sackett returns? A revenge killing? She was right, of course. It was a simple logical method if it became necessary. He would make a few inquiries. If any of the old crowd were around, he might just drop a word here and there. Anyway, this was all over nothing. This Sackett knew nothing, could know nothing. A thought suddenly occurred to him. He still had the map. He had kept it, believing it held a clue to the treasure. None of them knew he had it, for he had never mentioned it to anyone. After all, when one holds the only clue to the location of 30 million in gold, one does not talk about it. The stuff was there. He had taken the time to look up the old reports turned into the government those many years ago, and, of course, there was mention of the gold the French army had mined. 30 millions. He had been thinking of going back to look for that gold, and this was probably the time. He was 40 years old now, stronger and more able than ever. He must think about the future, and he had little faith in what Philip might leave them. Philip liked none of them too well, and with good reason. What did Sackett know? Orrin Sackett, standing before his mirror in the St. Charles Hotel, combed his hair carefully, set his cravat in place, and left his room. At the head of the stairs, he paused momentarily and touched his left side lightly. The Smith & Wesson Russian he carried was resting easily. No trouble was expected, but habit remains with a man. So far, the trip had netted him exactly nothing. He had doubted from the first that they would uncover anything. New Orleans was a big city. 20 years had passed, and the clues he had were slight. Still, if it would please Ma, there was no effort he would not make. After all, what information did he have? 20 years ago, a man of strong French accent wanted to make a trip to a certain place in the western mountains. That implied that he had made a previous trip, or that he had knowledge of someone who had made such a trip. Pa had been asked to guide this Frenchman, and the trip was expected to last but a few months, time to get there and return. What would take a man to lonely mountains at the risk of being killed by Indians? Furs? To trap furs, a man had to remain the winter through. A mine? Perhaps. He might wish to ascertain if the mine was worth development. Yet wasn't it more likely that he knew of gold already mined? Or thought he did? When Orrin added up all the information he had, he was looking for a Frenchman, probably from Louisiana, who had some previous connection, direct or indirect, with someone who had been to the western mountains. Flimsy as that was, it did much to clear the field, for not many Frenchmen had gone west from Louisiana. From Canada, yes. Of course, France had controlled all of Louisiana for a time, and during the period of the Mississippi Bubble and John Law, great efforts had been made to find gold and silver. Law had promised his investors wealth, and he made every effort to discover it, or indications of it. This Frenchman had not wanted a large party, yet it was unlikely that they had actually gone alone. Hence, one of the party might have returned, or there might be a relative who knew something about the affair. The trouble was, he had no starting point. Yet the simplest way was often the best, and that meant checking the obvious sources. In this case, government records of mines, claims, and exploring expeditions in the back country. Another way, equally simple, was to meet some of the older citizens and start them recalling their youth. It sometimes required patience, but he had an interest in such things and could afford a few days. Or he could get some discussion started of the John Law period, the most likely time for any mineral exploration. Bienville, during his governorship, had wasted little time searching for non-existent minerals. His had been a more practical, down-to-earth approach, and, had he been let alone to proceed as he wished, the colony might have been successful long before it was. At dinner, Orrin sat quietly and alone, listening to the idle talk around him and enjoying the lights and music. He had always enjoyed dining alone, for it gave him time to think as well as to absorb the atmosphere around him. And tonight the dining room was filled with attractive, beautifully gowned women and handsomely dressed men. The two tables closest to his were occupied, one of them by